Where we're at right now is not where we aspired to be in the beginning or where we aspire to be right now. Those are the words of Kyle Dubas from the Pittsburgh Penguins, president of hockey operations / general manager, as he addressed the media with regards to his hockey club. They are a handful of points outside of the wild card picture. We had a whole discussion earlier this week about Jake Guentzel and as it pertains to Sidney Crosby's future, which I still think he's not leaving, but worthwhile if you want to check out that discussion on Monday's episode. But so much to go through with this team, as it appears that they might be looking to sell off everyone that's not a part of their core. CJ, what did you make of Kyle Dubas' press conference yesterday and the future of the Pittsburgh Penguins as it pertains to this season?
Well, the quote you just read is a lot of words to be saying that this is a disappointment. I mean, there's no other way to look at this year in Pittsburgh. Kyle Dubas takes over that team, pretty significant overhaul on the fringes of the roster around obviously those core players, but between trades, free agent signings, obviously the big Erik Carlson deal, extended Tristan Jarry. I mean, a lot of big decisions were made by Kyle Dubas in a short amount of time. And it's just not gotten any more out of this team than what they had last year when they, played down to the last week of the regular season, last days of the regular season before missing the playoffs ultimately. And, they're in a worse position as we're recording this right now. I mean, they're 8 points out of a playoff spot in the wild card, 10 points out of third in the Metropolitan Division. And in fact, they're closer really to being a team that could be drafting in the top 10 than one that we should be looking at as a playoff team. And that's on the back of the season Sidney Crosby's having. In addition to that, I think it could be worse if he had aged the way normal humans age, even just from this year to last year. And so, yeah, it's a difficult spot. I think that Kyle Dubas wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't looking to make some trades, because he's got to free up the ability to have a big summer this year. I'll say this. I'm certainly of the opinion that a full rebuild doesn't make sense. I think that when you have those players and they want to be there and they want to try to retire as Penguins, it's kind of your duty as the organization to try to be as competitive as long as you can. And the full teardown rebuilds, they don't go too well, generally speaking. So, there should be urgency in Pittsburgh, but I don't think it should be urgency to try to squeeze into the playoffs now. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen. The good news, I suppose, is there's 2 more weeks before the deadline. So Kyle Dubas will get a little bit more information in terms of exactly where his team is at leading into March 8th. But ultimately, I think we're going to be talking about them trading a player or two or more out of town versus, trying to load up for a push to the playoffs.
You put up a trade board earlier today. How many more Pittsburgh Penguins will be on that list when you update it the next time around?
We'll see what the intel is. I mean, you've got Jake Guentzel pretty high up on that list for obvious reasons. We've talked about his situation a lot, but one thing Kyle Dubas said in his press conference on Wednesday was we have a lot of players signed to long contracts in their 30s. And the unspoken part of that is, do they want to add another one? As good as Jake Guentzel is, this is not a comment on him or whether he's worth investing in. I think it's more about, does he fit where that team is at? And it's hard for me to conclude that he does. Keep in mind that the Penguins traded away a first-round pick in that Carlson deal. The surest way to get one back, I would presume, at least with the sort of moves that they're willing to consider, would be trading Jake Guentzel at the deadline. You have a player like Riley Smith, who's got 1 more year on his deal. I think that, he just hasn't been a fit. That was one of the meant to be a more impactful offseason trade that Kyle Dubas pulled off at the draft and, hasn't worked for a variety of reasons. So you got him on the board. I think Ryan Graves is someone they'd look at moving, free agent signing that hasn't worked out, but it's a lot of term and money there. Probably not a deal that you see executed by March 8th, but there could be other depth types of trades too. I think, as I mentioned, the real key here is opening up a little bit of space, opening up the ability to make off-season moves, because they just can't be a team that runs it back the same way. You know what I mean? I think that they have to be doing absolutely everything they can to squeeze what they can out of the roster. And then if we get to a point where you say, okay, it's just not going to happen in Pittsburgh, then we're talking about the retool / rebuild.
So what about Erik Carlson? Do you put him in that core group of untouchables, or just is his contract just a little bit too difficult to move? How do you see it?
For the deadline, I would be stunned. I mean, San Jose was highly motivated to move him at last year's deadline, and it didn't work. Now, they ultimately ended up retaining a bit of salary. And keep in mind, if Pittsburgh gets to a point in the offseason where they think that moving on from Erik Carlson makes sense, I mean, they can retain more. And all of a sudden, you're no longer trading a $12 million player. It can become something a little bit more palatable and probably more in line with where Erik Carlson is at this stage of his career. But with him having a no move clause and the money, the financial aspect of that deal, I don't think that that's one you're going to pull off inside a 2 week window. But I think everything will have to be on the table this offseason, especially barring some magnificent, miraculous finish where they do get in the playoffs. I mean, then you're at 2 years in a row without the playoffs. You're facing a summer where you're going to be looking to get Sidney Crosby signed to his extension July 1st. And so, I think Pittsburgh should be one of the most active teams in the next 6 months of activity, or longer, into the summertime. And, that some of that work can get done here by March 8th. And so, Kyle didn't come out and say all this stuff. I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but I think that he was kind of implying that this is where it's going. It was quite clear he's not going to be a buyer. He's not, looking to unload more first round picks. This isn't necessarily there's not one or two moves out there that are going to drastically change anything. I think that it's more of, a good hard look at the roster entering next year. And I would think they'll be one of the teams we're talking a lot about the summer in terms of loading up and making some bold plays.
Kind of wild that Kyle Dubas goes from one situation in Toronto where he's doing everything he can to satisfy and appease and build up a core four, essentially, to a core three or maybe a core four, depending on how you look at it in Pittsburgh. It's just kind of a weird, funny situation for Kyle Dubas and what he's ended up in. And I don't envy the work that he has to do to put himself, to try to put the Pittsburgh Penguins over the top anyway. I don't envy him in that position.
It's a hard job to look good in, I feel like. And look, he got a 7-year contract, which is far more security than most people do. He was smart. I think he was realistic. That the term of that deal shows that both he and Fenway Sports Group, the team, the entity that owns the team, were realistic about the job ahead. Like I think that they understood it's possible the best days of the team are in the past, but you're trying to do what you can now, and then there's going to have to be some kind of retool on the fly. And I think if we look ahead, say 3 years, I think ideally, if you start with that sort of frame of reference in terms of time, if you're Kyle Dubas, you want to build this team up where it has a chance to be rebounding while Sidney Crosby's still part of it, right? I mean, it might not be possible. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, as I know you love when I say that, Julian, but I think that that's got to be the goal, as much as it is to clearly get them back to the playoffs. I mean, they haven't put up the white flag yet on this year's playoffs, but I'm thinking it's going to be difficult. But as much as it in short term to have success, I think you want to try to be integrating young players onto that roster at a time when Crosby can still be putting a stamp on a team, can be part of what they're doing, and maybe ultimately somehow, some way, be chasing the Stanley Cup. I mean, that seems like a far off goal, just because it generally takes teams a little while to build and build and build. But I think that has to be the goal in the front office, and that should inform what the decisions they make now, when it comes to this deadline.
Pittsburgh Penguins need a first-round pick, man. They only have a second, a fourth, a sixth, and 2 7ths in this summer's upcoming draft. We mentioned that first-round pick, gone to San Jose as part of that Erik Carlson trade. If they want to eventually kind of do this retool on the fly thing here, they need some kind of first-round pick. Probably Jake Gensel's the player to get that pick, but I don't think if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, you could accept just entering a draft without a first-round pick.
No, and look, I think that they keep that pick if it ends up in the top 10, which still not impossible. Yes. If the bottom falls out, they're kind of they're in a window where they could pick top 10. So they might end up picking this year in the top 10. But I'm with you. I think that they, as an organization, I'm not going to be critical of the moves made in the past. I mean, they didn't all work out, but when you've got 3 Stanley Cup banners with the core of this team, I think the end justifies the means there, that all the picks and deals they've made in past deadlines. Like, I don't have any problem with that, but they got to start. You're right. They have to start introducing younger players to that lineup. And they grafted a lot of older guys on there, right? I mean, they got Lars Ellers and even Riley Smith, where he's at in his career. Carlson's in his 30s. I mean, they Noel Acciari they signed. Like, they really have a lot of gray-haired members of that team. So I do think I do think that Kyle recognizes that transition has to start, and probably start a little bit next season.